good old days. Or were they? This is a close look at life in the early years of the 20th century, which turns up a picture different from glowing accounts so popular now. For many Americans, it seems those were the bad old days.
Light up a creamo, a mellow, mild creamo, a winning smoke by far. You can search every clime, but at 3 for a dime, you can't beat a creamo cigar. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen of the Sweet-Scented Cigar Smoking Society. This is Arthur Godfrey down in Washington, D.C., Cremo's capricious custodian of the calorific cantata.
Millions of Americans, troubled by an unsettled world, keep yearning for the good old days. They look back to the first decades of this century as a happier time when families were united, workers were industrious, the individual counted for something, and values were stable. Scholars, however, say the reality of those years differs greatly from the popular impression. The first 5 decades of the 20th century, they insist, were often grim and barely endurable. The bad old days, in fact, for a large portion of the U.S. population. The first half-century included 2 world wars in which hundreds of thousands of Americans were killed.
There never was a time when impatience and suspicion were more keenly aroused by private power selfishly employed. When jealousy of everything concealed or touched with any purpose not linked with the general good or inconsistent with it, more sharply or immediately displayed itself. Nor was the country ever more susceptible to unselfish appeal or to the high arguments of sincere justice. These are the unmistakable symptoms of an awakening.
Friends, it's so foolish to suffer with an ordinary headache when Bromo Seltzer gives you such fast, pleasant, 3-way relief.
Bromo Seltzer is so pleasant to take, and it works so fast to help your headache all 3 ways.
Caution, use only as directed. If headaches recur or persist, see your doctor. Get Bromo Seltzer today and... headache 3-way.
Divorce was rising fast, from 8 per 100 marriages in 1900 to 17 in 1930. People often were allowed to suffer and die without medical help because they couldn't afford it, and government care programs were virtually non-existent.
My countrymen, the menacing tendency of the present day is not chargeable wholly to the unsettled and fevered conditions caused by the war. The manifest weakness in popular government lies in the temptation to appeal to group citizenship for political advantage. There is no greater peril. The Constitution contemplates no class, recognizes no group. It broadly includes all the people, and the highest consecration we can make today is a committal of the Republican Party to that saving constitutionalism which contemplates all America as one people and holds just government free from influence on the one hand and unmoved by intimidation on the other. It would be the blindness of folly to ignore the activities in our own country which are aimed to destroy our economic system and to commit us to the colossal tragedy which has both destroyed all freedom and made Russia impotent. We must not abridge the freedom of speech. These liberties are as sacred as the freedom of religious belief.
A typical family at the turn of the century lived on a farm or in a small town, was of Northern European stock, and was reasonably self-sufficient. Many raised their own meat and vegetables and sold the surplus to pay for everything else, including innovations such as telephones and electric lights. Women knew their place in the home. Those who dared attend college often were regarded as odd.
I've heard so much about Magic Touch, Campana's new cream makeup. Is it so very different from other makeups?
It's so different that you'll never believe how much prettier it will make you until you try it.
What does it look like?
Magic Touch is a wafer-thin cream in a beautiful white and gold compact.
Do I use powder, too?
No, if you want the new luminous effect, and I don't mean shiny. Yes, if you want to give your complexion a matte finish.
I'm going to try it tomorrow.
And believe me, you'll never know how pretty you can be until you do. Trial bottle 35 cents at any drugstore.
The majority of Negroes lived in the South. Most were denied the right to vote or to obtain anything but a rudimentary education or to mix with whites. Lynchings were not uncommon. For many members of the growing middle class, the first years of the century were good, lending credence to the visions generated in the present-day enthusiasm for nostalgia. The era that ended with the start of World War I brought new opulence to their tables and more independence to their lives.
The expenses of the government reach everybody. Taxes take from everyone a part of his earnings and force everyone to work for a certain part of his time for the government. When we come to realize that the yearly expenses of the governments of this country, the stupendous sum of about $7,500,000,000, we get $700 million is needed by the national government and the remainder by local government. Such a sum is difficult to comprehend. It represents all the pay of 5 million wage earners receiving $5 a day, working 300 days in the year. If the government should add $100 million of expense, it would represent 4 days more work of these wage earners. These are some of the reasons why I want to cut down public expense. I want the people of America to be able to work less for the government and more for themselves.
A rising number of Henry Ford's black Model Ts helped make it possible to visit distant friends more easily. Total automobile production increased from 23,000 in 1904 to 573,000 in 1914.
Standing on the corner, watching all the Fords go by. So don't be standing on the corner, watching all the Fords, watching all the Fords. Be the guy who's going by.
While Theodore Dreiser's novels were sounding a dark note about the state of American society, other currents in the arts, such as Victor Herbert's lilting operettas, reflected a lingering innocence, and culture was spreading into small county seats, regularly visited by top-notch entertainers on the Chautauqua tent circuit. Millions of other Americans, however, were not sharing these delights in a society that offered little protection to the poor against disease or disaster.
Wouldn't you like to receive absolutely free a brand new Chevrolet 6, any model you want? All right, listen to this. Starting tomorrow is a feature of National Drive a Chevrolet Month. One of those big, fine-looking Chevrolet 6s will be given away every day, absolutely free. Your name may be announced over the radio next Friday night as one of the winners of a new Chevrolet 6.
A recent book, Wisconsin Death Trip by Michael Lessie, recounts from an old journal the unexceptional story of one rural clan. The family of William H. Verkin, a farmer residing 2 miles south of Norwalk, Monroe County, Wisconsin, has had a great deal of hard luck the past year. On Easter of last year, Mr. Verkin's mother died, and a short time afterward he lost $100 worth of sheep. A valuable colt fell dead later on. A month later, his 8-year-old son died after an illness of 4 weeks. Last fall, another horse broke his leg and had to be shot, and a week afterward, a 2-year-old boy, the only remaining child, broke a leg. A few days ago, the residence was destroyed by fire, the insurance policy having expired a week previous. Mrs. Verkin, who was confined to her bed with newly born twins, was obliged to leave the burning house during a severe snowstorm. Times were changing rapidly, and according to some historians, the trends of the early 1900s made a bigger impact on most lives than did the turbulent 1960s and the early 1970s. Between 1900 and 1914, a wave of more than 13 million immigrants, a large portion of them from Southern and Eastern Europe, entered the United States. The effects were enormous on a country which had a total of 76 million residents in 1900. Many native-born Americans were afraid of foreign influences brought by the newcomers and fearful that immigrants would take their jobs, working for far less. It was similar to complaints made decades later against blacks and Puerto Ricans. Mainly peasants and often illiterate, the immigrants were poor and crowded into the slums of eastern cities, where disease and immorality flourished.
You worked too hard, you ate too much, the cheesecake made you greedy. Let your aching head and stomach hear this message from old Speedy. Alka-Seltzer, plop, plop, fizz, fizz, oh, what a relief it is. Plop, plop, fizz, fizz, oh, what a relief it is. Ah, those Speedy Alka-Seltzer bubbles burst into action to relieve your upset stomach and aching head fast. Use only as directed. Oh, what a relief it is. What a relief.
Most worked for a pittance in hot, smelly factories with machines in which human arms and eyes were routinely lost and for which there was no compensation. A survey in 1900 showed that the average daily wage for a variety of occupations was $2.44, less than in 1872. Workers demanded a better deal, and industrialists, whose businesses had expanded beyond their wildest dreams since the Civil War, came face to face with increasingly militant labor unions. Membership in unions grew rapidly, reaching 3.4 million by 1929, but in the early years of the century, workers' rights still had limited backing. In 1908, for instance, the General Conference of the Methodist Episcopal Church scandalized some members by noting that workers had the right to organize and that the labor movement was of great benefit to society at large.
To keep your dog in top condition, get your pet complete nutrition. Feed them sturdy, make them sturdy, happy, friendly, happy, birdie. Any dog can be a winner if he eats some sturdy dinner. Feed them sturdy, beefy sturdy, that with thanks insist on sturdy. Ask any dog who's tasted it, the doggy with the bit. You sturdy dinner, dog food is delicious. Get sturdy.
The trauma of World War I, in which the U.S. suffered 321,000 casualties, is widely regarded as a benchmark in the evolution of modern America. Social changes were set in motion by massive mobilization of resources, and the new order could be held back no longer. Women began to exercise much more than their newly won right to vote. They were allowed to enter the U.S. civil service, and in 1932 were guaranteed equal opportunities with men and federal jobs by President Herbert Hoover. Although the 18th Amendment to the Constitution made it illegal to produce or sell alcoholic beverages, expanding criminal syndicates made fat profits peddling booze under the counter, provoking gangland killings on a massive scale. Nevertheless, there were strong countercurrents. In 1925, John Thomas Scopes, a science teacher in Tennessee, was found guilty of breaking the law by explaining evolution to his class. Across the nation, crowds thronged to hear the Reverend William A. otherwise known as Billy Sunday, preach against declining morality, including card playing, dancing, and movies on the Sabbath.
10 beans times 4 beans, and add 3 more beans, make 43 rich coffee beans.
Yes, you get 43 beans in every cup of Nescafe, real coffee beans, that's all there is. In Nescafe, 43 beans in every cup. Make Nescafe the all-coffee instant coffee. With the let's have another cup taste.
Extra beans means extra flavor. Today's Nescafe goes all the way for flavor with 43 choice beans in every cup.
Films reflecting the new trends were coming under growing attack, and one result was the establishment of an industry self-censorship board. Modern Americans, according to historians, also tend to forget that violence has been a part of national life since the Revolution. The bombings of public buildings in the late 1960s are seen as pale reflections of the waves of explosions that shook widely scattered parts of the country in 1919 and 1920. In the most sensational incident, extremists set off a bomb at midday on September the 16th, 1920, in New York's crowded Wall Street financial district, which resulted in the deaths of 38 people and injuries to hundreds. Widely blamed, rightly or wrongly, for many of the outrages were the growing communist and socialist organizations. Some of the more militant labor unions, such as the Industrial Workers of the World, also were accused of fomenting violence. At the same time, businessmen sometimes hired thugs to protect their interests and break the heads of the workers if necessary. As a result, there were bloody clashes between labor and management. Outright killings were common. Sit-down strikes stirred more violence in the Great Depression, which destroyed the personal holdings of tens of millions of people.
When you suffer from irregularity and take mineral oil for relief, chances are that you get only halfway relief. You see, irregularity is frequently accompanied by acid indigestion, and when this is the case, you need a preparation that combines laxative action with antacid action to bring you thorough relief. You can identify Haley's M-O on the package.
Plummeting stock prices in October 1929 set off a chain reaction leading to the closing of whole industries and the loss of hundreds of thousands of jobs. Overnight, middle-class Americans who had availed themselves of easy credit to buy houses and cars found themselves destitute and their property repossessed by the banks. Eventually, even many of the banks closed, 4,000 in 1933 alone, and much of the country was awash in red ink.
Because of undermined confidence on the part of the public, there was a general rush by a large portion of our population to turn bank deposits into currency or gold. A rush so great that the soundest banks couldn't get enough currency to meet the demand. The reason for this was that on the spur of the moment, it was of course impossible to sell perfectly sound assets of a bank and convert them into cash except at panic prices far below their real values. It was then that I issued the proclamation providing for the national bank holiday, and this was the first step in the government's reconstruction of our financial and economic fabric. This law also gave authority to develop a program of rehabilitation of our banking facilities. The third stage has been the series of regulations permitting the banks to continue their functions, to take care of the distribution of food and household necessities and the payment of payrolls. This bank holiday, while resulting in many cases in great inconvenience, is affording us the opportunity to supply the currency necessary to meet the situation.
National income declined from $83 billion in 1928 to $43 billion in 1932. Professional men joined bread lines, ex-factory workers begged for handouts, and many once wealthy businessmen committed suicide.
Waiter! Waiter! Bill, did you ever see such poor service? I'm going to call the manager.
Take it easy, Walt. What's mostly wrong is your gout.
I'm sorry, Phil, but my digestion is so upset.
What you may need for your poor digestion is something that works after nature's own order. Try Carter's Little Liver Pills.
Good advice. When your digestion is upset and you feel headachy and irritable, take Carter's Little Liver Pills. Don't depend on artificial aids to counteract indigestion when Carter's Little Liver Pills aid digestion after nature's own order. Take Carter's Little Liver Pills as directed. Get them at any drugstore, only 25 cents.
Traditional pride and confidence in American achievements were temporarily eroded, to the point where there were widespread fears that U.S. democracy would not survive. Some citizens predicted that the country's freely elected government would fall to either communists or fascists, such as were gaining ground in Europe, which also was economically stricken. It was anything but the romantic period that today's movie writers would have you believe, observed a New York sociologist. People were starving, and the country was desperate. Under President Franklin D. Roosevelt, the U.S. government launched programs in an attempt to help provide jobs and get the economy moving.
Maybe you're sort of tired of eating the same old thing day after day. Maybe you'd like to try something different, something delicious, something with a marvelous flavor that just knocks the spots off any other cereal you've ever tried. Now, if that's the case, why don't you ask your mother to let you have a big bowl of crackly, crunchy, golden brown Wheaties flakes tomorrow morning? You'll say it's swell.
Try Wheaties, they're whole wheat with all of the brands. Won't you try Wheaties? For wheat is the best food of man. They're crispy, they're crunchy the whole year through. Jack Hampton never tires of them, and neither will you. So just buy Wheaties, the best breakfast food in the land.
The problems, however, persisted, and the situation grew even more desperate when a prolonged drought devastated the Midwest in the 1930s. In the vast dust bowl that engulfed much of the region, bone-dry topsoil was blown away and thousands of farms were abandoned. A retired medical technician recalls a scene in Kansas when her parents were reduced to nothing. They had nowhere to turn, so, like many other farmers, made plans to sell their land to the government for $3 an acre. This was land which had been worth $150 an acre during the World War I years.
If your friends smoke a long cigarette, give the best of long cigarettes, Fatima.
Give Fatima for quality.
Yes, Fatima is the long cigarette, which contains the finest Turkish and domestic tobaccos superbly blended to make Fatima extra mild. It's the long cigarette that has doubled and redoubled its smokers. Yes, more and more smokers every day agree. Fatima is the best of all long cigarettes.
Then there was the inevitable public sale, which each man had in order to get enough money to leave the country. Family heirlooms, wedding presents, farm machinery, chickens, and cows were auctioned off for a few pennies to the remaining neighbors who bid shamefacedly, only to help a neighbor who was more destitute than himself. I believe the receipt books showed one item, a cow that went for $4. In view of all the misery and disorder of the Depression, it seems strange to some younger historians that anybody would be nostalgic about those times. Yet many Americans have in the past recalled the 1930s as some of the happiest years of their lives, partly because most were too young to sense fully their parents' anxieties.
Here's the proposition. Regardless of what coal you're now burning in your furnace, order a ton of blue coal. Try blue coal for a week. and see if it doesn't give you more even, more dependable, longer-lasting heat. And be sure to hold on till the end of this program. You'll want to hear our special guest of the evening.
Howdy, hi-yo, Silver, the Lone Ranger.
According to some sociologists, the difficulties forced families to pull together to a degree seldom seen before or after, and encouraged neighbors to help each other. The television series The Waltons reflects the warmth of a cohesive family and the strength of community spirit, which many find lacking today. Overall, however, the Depression era is widely regarded by scholars who lived through it as one of the most frightening periods of U.S. history, ended only by the even greater horrors of worldwide death and destruction in World War II. For many Americans, the good old days really began in the euphoric last years of the 1940s, when America's power was at its zenith and peace and prosperity seemed to lie ahead. Historians agree that life in the first half of the century had many agreeable aspects. Taken as a whole, however, they say that it was anything but the idyllic era in the nation's past that many Americans visualize today as troubles of the present close in on them.